The FBI is investigating some new ransom notes in the Nancy Guthrie.
At this point, it is clear that every effort is being made from both family and law enforcement to bring Nancy home. The tip lines are active. The reward has crossed the $1 million mark. Federal resources remain embedded in Tucson. And yet, nearly 2 months later, something about this investigation has shifted. Not loudly, not publicly, but structurally. There were 4 things that stood out to a former federal agent after watching Savannah's latest message. 4 details that do not point backward. They point forward. To understand why, you have to understand the ground this crime sits on. The Catalina foothills is not an ordinary neighborhood. It rests on the lower slopes of the Santa Catalina Mountains north of Tucson. Wide streets, large setbacks, homes positioned far from the road, no sidewalks in many sections, no commercial traffic, no bus routes, no reason for pedestrian movement. After dark, after 10 p.m., the streets are still. After midnight, they are almost empty. In neighborhoods like this, familiarity is not a luxury. It is the default setting. Neighbors recognize vehicles at a glance. They know which landscaper services which driveway. They know when a contractor is expected and when someone is out of place. Not because they are suspicious, because the rhythm of the community rarely changes. And that is what makes what happened here different. In an area where strangers do not blend, someone moved with enough confidence to approach a home at 2:00 a.m., disable cameras, enter, remain inside for an extended period, and leave without triggering immediate alarm. That is not opportunistic behavior. That is operational behavior. The FBI has described this as targeted. Retired federal agents have described it as planned. A retired SWAT commander from the same county used the phrase intentional crime, targeted, specific to this house. That assessment has now extended to a single property nearby, a house that was recently vacant. The FBI is back on that street, but this time they are not asking general questions. They are asking about that house. Why? Because in a neighborhood, this familiar infrastructure matters. A vacant property alters the geometry of awareness. In a fully occupied street, irregular presence stands out. In a street where one house is empty, presence becomes ambiguous. A rental property introduces rotation. Faces change, cars change, activity fluctuates. No one can reasonably track every shift in occupancy. And if someone needed proximity to NY's home for an extended period of time, proximity without drawing attention, a rental property offers something powerful. Cover, not an alibi after the fact. Cover in real time. A reason to park, a reason to walk, a reason to observe. If a neighbor asks a question, the explanation is immediate. I'm staying next door. Conversation ends. Bob Kyrie understands this terrain at a level few outside voices can replicate. He is not a media analyst. He is a retired commander from Puma County's SWAT team. He ran high-risk operations in this exact geography. He understands how movement works here, how darkness settles here, how visibility changes after midnight on streets like these. When he described the vacant house as a possible home base or staging location, that was not dramatic phrasing. That was operational vocabulary. A staging location is where preparation happens, where equipment can be stored before deployment, where someone can exist near a target location without appearing suspicious. He went further. He suggested the property could be used to set up surveillance equipment inside the structure itself, not binoculars from a window. Physical installation, a device capable of sustained monitoring, remote feed, continuous observation. The physical geography makes this plausible. From approximately 50 feet away, sustained observation over weeks reveals patterns. When lights turn off, when they turn on, which door is used most frequently, when the driveway is empty, when the occupant is alone. The verified timeline of NY's final evening illustrates exactly how valuable that information would be. She left for dinner in the late afternoon. She returned home at 9:48 p.m. By 9:50, the garage door had closed. She was inside and alone. At 1:47 a.m., the doorbell camera disconnected. Between 9:50 and 1:47, the neighborhood was silent, 4 hours. Anyone observing from close proximity would know that window was consistent, predictable, operational. And here is where the timeline of the rental becomes critical. There are conflicting reports about when the renters left that property. One account suggests the house was vacant before February 1st. Another suggests the renters departed immediately after the abduction. A third says within days. Those differences are not minor. If the house was vacant before the crime, it created a blind space in the neighborhood's awareness. No occupant, no one to question unusual activity. If the renters left immediately after, the departure itself becomes significant. Movement following a high-profile crime always carries investigative weight. The FBI has not clarified publicly which timeline is accurate. When asked directly, they decline to comment. That silence is not routine. The Bureau has confirmed other details in this case. They confirmed the doorbell footage. They confirmed blood evidence. They confirmed the investigation is targeted. Choosing not to address this property specifically is deliberate, and deliberate silence in an active investigation often signals relevance. At the same time, investigators are compiling a name-by-name roster of construction workers active in the neighborhood during the weeks before February 1st. Not companies, individuals, every worker, every contractor. Construction provides legitimate presence. A truck parked on a residential street does not raise suspicion. Workers walking between properties do not attract attention. They observe naturally without explanation. If someone conducted sustained observation under legitimate cover, either from a rental or through construction access, these investigative threads intersect. Who had a reason to be there? Who had proximity without scrutiny? And what were they doing with that proximity? A longtime neighbor flagged the vacant property in the first week after Nancy disappeared. She asked investigators to check it. 6 weeks later, the FBI is back asking targeted questions about that exact house. That is not coincidence. That is follow-through. When investigators return to a location weeks later, it usually means new information has surfaced. A name, a device, a data point. Verification follows identification, and identification follows pattern. This case is not drifting, it is tightening. Infrastructure is being examined. Movement is being mapped. Presence is being cross-referenced. And in neighborhoods like the Catalina foothills, presence is not random. It is explainable. If someone used that property, if someone watched from that window, if someone had sustained access to that street under legitimate cover. The question now is not whether investigators are aware of the possibility. The question is how close they are to attaching a name to it. Nancy Guthrie remains missing. The reward remains active. The tip line remains open. But the geometry of this investigation has changed from wide to narrow, from general to specific. And in cases like this, when infrastructure begins to matter, resolution often follows. When investigators return to a location weeks after an abduction and begin asking narrower, more technical questions, it usually means something new has entered the case file. Not rumor, not speculation, something tangible. Because law enforcement does not revisit ground without a reason. And in the Catalina foothills, ground is not casual. Every street has limited entry points. Every vehicle that enters or exits passes through predictable routes. There are only so many ways in and so many ways out. That matters when proximity becomes central. The vacant property is not being examined in isolation. It is being examined alongside a widening digital footprint. Cell tower data from the surrounding area has been subpoenaed. Devices that were active near NY's home during the relevant time window are being analyzed, cross-referenced, and filtered. But investigators are not only looking at the night of February 1st. They are looking backward, January 11th, January 23rd, any date where unusual presence may have occurred, because surveillance does not happen once. It happens repeatedly. And if someone was operating from a nearby property, whether vacant or temporarily occupied, their device would have left a signature. Even if powered off at key moments, the gaps themselves become data points. Digital silence can be as revealing as digital presence. Then there is the matter of the deauthentication signal that disrupted nearby cameras. Devices capable of knocking security cameras offline do not operate invisibly. They emit measurable interference. When mapped across affected cameras, timing can reveal direction. Sequence can reveal movement. If camera A went dark at one time and camera B seconds later, investigators can reconstruct path. Combine that with cell tower sector data and the margin narrows. Now add construction worker rosters into that narrowing funnel. Workers who were present during the day, vehicles that parked repeatedly on the street, individuals who had legitimate access to view lines. The request for individual names suggests that investigators are not merely looking for vague recollections. They are matching names against digital presence, against purchase history, against physical description, because the suspect seen in the doorbell footage was not invisible. Eyebrows visible beneath the ski mask, a distinct mustache, a pinky ring worn under gloves. Those details are not random. They are identifiers, and identifiers are searchable. So, retail records from the specific backpack worn that night have already been obtained. Walmart transactions, SKU numbers, store surveillance footage. If purchased by card, a name is attached. If purchased with cash, a timestamp is attached. And timestamps are cross-referenced with store cameras. Even if the suspect believed cash insulated the transaction, modern retail systems do not operate in darkness. Every register has a lens. Every aisle has coverage. The investigative funnel tightens further when you consider Wi-Fi probe requests. Smartphones constantly broadcast signals seeking familiar networks. If a device entered proximity to NY's router during the abduction window, the router may have captured an identifier. That identifier can lead to a service provider, an account, an address, and that is before DNA is even introduced. Reports confirm biological evidence was recovered from the home, some of it mixed. Mixed samples are complex but not impossible. Modern forensic software separates contributor profiles. Partial matches can be run through cooties. If no direct hit appears, genetic genealogy becomes the next step. That process does not require a suspect to have a criminal record. It requires a relative, a distant cousin, someone who uploaded DNA voluntarily to a consumer database. From there, family trees are constructed. Branches are narrowed, geography is overlaid, age ranges are compared, occupational patterns are examined. It is methodical, quiet, and often invisible to the public until the final stage. The final stage is surveillance. If a viable candidate emerges, yet investigators do not announce it, they watch. They collect discarded DNA from trash. They compare it. They confirm. Then they move. Which brings us back to the rental property. If that house served as infrastructure, whether for observation or equipment storage, there will be traces, utility usage patterns, short-term occupancy anomalies, access records, rental agreements, payment methods. Every lease generates paperwork. Every deposit leaves a trail. Even cash rentals leave identifiers. And if occupants departed suddenly, that movement is documented. Moving trucks, key returns, security deposit processing, property management, communication. Paper trails are difficult to erase completely. A neighbor reported seeing an unfamiliar man weeks before the abduction. Hat pulled low, street clothing, not walking gear, and hunched posture. Present, then absent. In a neighborhood where regularity defines expectation, that anomaly stands out. If that presence aligns with rental access, if it aligns with construction access, if it aligns with device presence, the convergence becomes difficult to dismiss. Investigations like this do not hinge on a single revelation. They hinge on convergence. Digital convergence, physical convergence, behavioral convergence, financial convergence. The FBI's deliberate silence regarding the rental suggests ongoing evaluation. They have not cleared it publicly. They have not dismissed it. They have not confirmed it, which means it remains active. At nearly 2 months in, the case has not scattered. It has narrowed. Infrastructure, proximity, presence, names, digital trails, forensic analysis, and each piece feeding into the same central question. Who had sustained access to that street without drawing suspicion, and what did they do with it? Nancy Guthrie is still missing. The reward stands at over $1 million. The tip line remains active, and the geometry of this investigation is no longer broad. It is focused. When cases transition from wide canvassing to infrastructure mapping, they are often approaching resolution. Not immediate, but approaching. The rental property is not a headline. It is a variable being measured, cross-referenced, verified, and in investigations built on patience, variables eventually resolve. The next movement in this case will not be speculation. It will be confirmation, and confirmation, when it comes, will make the weeks of silence make sense. There is a point in every major investigation where the visible activity slows, but the internal work accelerates. From the outside, it can look like quiet. From the inside, it is compression. This case has reached that point. The focus is no longer on searching miles of desert terrain. It is no longer on broad public appeals. It is on structure, infrastructure, proximity, presence. The vacant property is not just a location. It represents opportunity. Opportunity to observe without suspicion. Opportunity to prepare without interruption. Opportunity to exist inside a tightly familiar neighborhood without being questioned. But opportunity alone does not commit a crime. Planning does. The FBI has already stated this was targeted. That word carries weight. Targeted means the home was chosen intentionally. The timing was deliberate. The approach was calculated. If that is true, then observation preceded action. And if observation preceded action, someone needed a vantage point. 50 feet is not far. From 50 feet, routine becomes predictable. From 50 feet, patterns emerge. From 50 feet, a 4-hour operational window becomes obvious. Nancy left for dinner. She returned at 9:48 p.m. The garage closed at 9:50. She was alone. By 1:47 a.m., her doorbell camera was offline. Between those times, the neighborhood was silent. If someone had watched that house long enough, they would know that silence was consistent, and consistency breeds confidence. Confidence breeds execution. But confidence also leaves traces. Every rental agreement leaves documentation. Every construction project leaves rosters. Every device leaves digital footprints. Every purchase leaves timestamps. Every action leaves something. The question is not whether something was left behind. The question is how close investigators are to isolating it. 6 weeks into this investigation, the FBI is not widening its search. It is narrowing its inquiry. That distinction matters. When agents request name-by-name lists of construction workers, it suggests cross-referencing. When they revisit a specific property, it suggests refinement. When they decline to comment on that property publicly, it suggests sensitivity. Silence can be strategic, especially when investigators believe someone is watching the coverage. If someone used that house, if someone believed proximity guaranteed invisibility, if someone believed familiarity masked their movement, and then the tightening geometry of this investigation may already be pressing inward. The Catalina foothills is not built for anonymity. It is built for consistency, which means deviation stands out over time. A car parked too often, lights on in a house that should be vacant, movement at irregular hours, even small anomalies become meaningful once investigators know what to look for. And that is the shift occurring now. This is no longer about whether something happened. It is about who had the infrastructure to make it happen, who had proximity without scrutiny, who had a reason to be there, and who left behind something small enough to overlook at first, but significant enough to confirm later. Nancy Guthrie remains missing. Her family remains waiting. The reward remains active. But the shape of this investigation is not random. It is methodical. It is moving from environment to individual, from possibility to probability. When cases transition into infrastructure analysis, they often resolve through convergence. Digital data aligning with physical access aligning with witness accounts aligning with financial or rental documentation, and once those lines intersect, they do not diverge again. If someone believed a vacant property offered invisibility, they may have underestimated one thing. Vacancy leaves records. Silence leaves questions. And questions, when asked repeatedly, narrow into answers. Nearly 2 months have passed. The FBI is back on that street. They're not asking general questions. They're asking about one house, one variable, one point of infrastructure. And infrastructure, when examined closely, often leads directly to a name. If you know something about that property, if you noticed unusual activity, if you observed movement that did not align with normal neighborhood patterns, the tip line remains open. The reward remains substantial, and anonymity is protected because someone knows, someone saw, someone connected a detail that felt small at the time. When this case resolves, it will not be because of noise. It will be because of structure. A house 50 feet away, a street that rarely changes, a pattern that did, and investigators who returned not to search again, but to confirm. This investigation is not drifting, it is tightening, and tightening cases eventually close. See.